see there at the IMF headquarters. Now, we want to explore why the IMF lowered the forecast of global growth. Our very own Zhou Yun sat down with the IMF's chief economist, Olivier Blanchard.
The revision is not very large. I mean, it's about 0.1% for this year, 0.1% for next year. So these are small revisions, but it's clear that the recovery is weak and it's uneven. I mean, if you look, in advanced economies, you have the US, which is doing well, and then you have the Eurozone and Japan, which are not doing so well. Emerging markets are in a different position. I think they have recovered to a large extent, but they have problems with potential growth, with growth looking forward, which are quite different.
Now we're kind of seeing two different directions in terms of monetary policy, because the Federal Reserve is tapering and is talking about interest rate, and the ECB is trying to carry more stimulus package in order to boost the economy. So what impact do you think all those capital inflow and outflow and market volatility will bring to emerging markets like China?
So I think that's an important issue, but mostly for the relation between what's going to happen in the Eurozone and the US. And clearly, if the US starts increasing interest rates and the Eurozone does not, that's going to put upward pressure on the dollar, downward pressure on the euro, and we're already seeing some of that. For emerging markets, it depends very much as to whether you're trading more with the Eurozone or more with the US. But I would say in general, the US tightening is going to be the big event. It is going to be what leads many countries to increase their interest rates and face capital outflows, or at least a decrease in capital inflows.
Another new challenge that brought up in this report is called a mediocre level of growth. Yes. So what are the countries that you think might have these problems, and what can they do? I mean, policymakers in these countries can do in order to inject more new momentum into their economic growth.
So I think by new mediocre, we mean something a bit more technical, which is low potential growth, which is the growth that you can hope to achieve over the next 5-10 years. And what has happened here is that in a number of countries, we've revised our estimate of potential growth down. We've done this for advanced economies. It was already very low in advanced economies, in particular in Japan. But in many emerging market countries, we've revised potential growth down by 1%, 1.5%, a substantial amount. So the future is not as bright as it used to be. And that creates challenges. So, emerging markets are still going to grow at a high rate, but not quite as high as before, and therefore they have to adapt to that.
And also the IMF in this report remained its forecast for Chinese economy at the same level. Yes. So where does this kind of confidence and optimism come from? Are you kind of worried about the slowing sign?
No, because I think there is a slowdown in housing, there's a slowdown in credit, but this was largely anticipated. So our forecast, even before, reflected that, and therefore we're not surprised by what's happening. So for the moment, we stick to our forecast. We think that growth will be a bit lower than it used to be, obviously, but we're not changing the numbers. Now, clearly, things can always be worse. The housing slump can be stronger. It might be difficult to offset with other measures, but we remain fairly confident about our forecast.
How would you interpret those slowdowns? Do you take them as cyclical changes, or do you take them as the changes brought by the reform that are carried out by Chinese government?
For the moment, much of the slowdown is due to the slowdown in real estate, in housing. I think what we're seeing is a housing boom, and hopefully not too bad a housing bust. I think that's what dominates the scene. Now, looking forward, what we all want, the Chinese government, the third plenum, the IMF, is to see a reorientation of growth from investment to consumption. And that's likely to come with lower growth. And this is why when we think about Chinese growth in the future, we have lower numbers than the numbers today. But I don't think we've seen this happen on a major scale yet. At this stage, it's very much a housing credit cycle than what we want to happen.